Hi, Flosstube. It's Arlene here. It is Thursday, January 20th, 2022. Happy New Year. This is my first Flosstube video of the year, and I'm pretty excited. um, when Because I'm not a Flosstuber who does, on a particular schedule every 2 weeks or whatever, whenever there's enough for me to say, I come on here. And so there's always different levels of excitement of what I want to share, or what I have to share. Today I'm very excited for what I have to share. If you're new here, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. You know the drill with YouTube. The likes, the comments, and the subscribes all make a difference because this is a pretty special one. I have a new release. For those who are new, I design under the name Works by ABC. You can find, I have an Etsy store, and you'll see some links below. And today I'm releasing a new design. Now, I've also been working on my Nashville releases, which will be out at the beginning of March. But this one was so special, I didn't want to wait for Nashville. I didn't want it to be lost within the excitement of so many new things for Nashville. So here we go. I would like to present to you Rosena Disery, 1820. Now, if you're thinking, Arlene, you're not a reproduction sampler person, you're right. If you're someone who has bought some of my designs or looked at some of my designs, this is not my typical style. The word was about to come out of my mouth, and then I was thinking, what is my style? It's quite eclectic. Different story. If you have been watching videos this past summer, I did release out a sampler, and that was a special situation. I got in contact with someone who wanted a chart of a family heirloom, and then once I created the chart, I said, and she actually said maybe someone else would be interested in stitching it, and so I had put that out there. But this one is pretty special. So I hope you're willing to sit down and listen to a story. The shorthand version, or not the shorthand version of the story, but let me get to this. If you like what you see here and you'd like to get it, there are links below to the listings on my Etsy store. I sell both hard copy to paper copy to mail to you, or PDF for instant download. So if you want to pause and go get it, that's fine. But I got a story to share with you. So if this, depending exactly when you're watching this, if this looks kind of familiar, I'm wondering if you're following the Instagram. I meant to double check it. I'm pretty sure it's Antique Samplers. The Instagram of M. Finkel and Daughter, which is an antiques dealer that specializes in samplers and textiles. If it looks familiar, because she posted this past Monday the picture of the original. And why on Monday? Well, I'm holding this up for a reason. I don't know how many of you are reading as I've been holding it. Rosena Disery, age 15 years, New York African Free School, April 1820. It is so unusual to have a sampler that has clearly been identified by being stitched by a black girl. Most of the time there's, you wouldn't know the difference between a white girl or a black girl who stitched it. Obviously, majority of samplers out there have been stitched by white students from upper classes who could attend schools that did samplers. I know there is a school in Virginia that has was a school for black girls and has identified some samplers there. But the New York African Free School, which I have lots to tell you about, there are only 2 known samplers, and by known, that they've been identified with the stitching that were stitched by girls from the New York African Free School. Could there be others out there? Absolutely, but none that have been identified by the stitching. The other one is very different. I like Rosena a whole lot. So sit back, let me tell you a little story here. If you've seen anytime you watch me on Flosstube or seen my videos, or purchase any of my patterns, if there's a story to share, I like to share it. And this is the biggest story I have. So go back in time about a year ago. My friend Letitia, crafty curator here on Instagram, here on Flosstube and on Instagram and so on IG, she had reposted from that antique sampler IG account a picture of Rosena Disery, the very picture that Amy Finkel, who runs that site, had posted. And so Letitia reposted it and said, wrote, "Does anyone know if there's a pattern for this?" And, I paused and looked. There are lots of samplers that come through my IG feed, as I'm sure many of you. And I don't want to say I always scroll past them, but, sometimes they all start to look alike. But just reading her words had me pause and then had me looking closely at the picture. And I picked up right away this particular uniqueness, New York African Free School. And I thought, there's a story there. So a couple of quick Google searches, and I realized just how much of a story there is. And then I went back to Letitia's comment, "Does anyone know if there's a pattern out there?" So in that Google searching, fairly quickly was able to determine that the sampler is in the collection of the New York Historical Society. Now, this next part is a great example of you never know until you give it a try. Because once I discovered where the sampler was, I wondered, well, what would it take to get permission to reproduce it, to make a pattern? I was so intrigued. I loved the piece. I loved the words on it. I loved the story. And so I sort of like, well, should I ask them? Should I ask them? Okay. And I thought, all right, well, three things could happen. They could say, no, we are not giving you permission. Okay. They could say yes with some caveats. I'm thinking in particular, a significant amount of money to pay for rights or whatever. Or they could say yes. So I found the name of and I wrote an email, who I was, what I do, blah, blah. And the answer came back, yes. You're welcome to use this image to create a cross-stitch pattern as you described, and I was so excited. I was able to get from them high-resolution pictures, and we'll talk about seeing it in person versus not and what all that means, but high-resolution pictures where you can see individual stitches really is pretty amazing when you're charting a design. So let me share a little bit of the details of the pattern itself. This is the largest, in terms of number of pages, pattern I've ever put out. There's a total of 18 pages in here, folks. And for two particular reasons why that number is so large. So I stitched on French vanilla from R&R Reproductions. I had teased this some number of videos ago. I'm stitching on something. Here's a little sneak peek of the fabric. So 32 count French vanilla linen using R&R Reproductions, French vanilla. And I use DMC. There are 14 colors of DMC. There is a significant amount of over one as well as over two stitching. And often the case with samplers, the writing, the words are definitely over one. There is also, this border up here that is also over one. And I know many sampler patterns that have, a girl's name or something in over one. Often in the pattern you see like a rectangle and it says see other page, and then that little part has been blown up so that you can read 1 over 1 chart. Because of how much words there was in 1 over 1 plus that border, as I tried to figure out how that kind of thinking would work, it became a messy looking pattern. And I was like, as a stitcher, I wouldn't want to deal with, figure out this, no. So I've ended up printing the pattern fairly large. It takes up 12 pages, which, you could, dimensions. The stitching is about 11 by 13 and a half inches. And normally a sampler of this size wouldn't necessarily need 12 pages, but because I've printed it so large so you can see the over one charting. I tried to reproduce it as accurately as I could. I did a lot of research and reading about, there's plenty of designers out there that are experts at charting and reproducing samplers, and they clearly have a lot more experience as I do. And I wondered about a few things, certainly about errors, and then other things that there's just no way to know, was it on purpose or not? And so just for example, in terms of errors, the letter E, it's this one, has an extra stitch on it. And, I was charting it. And then when I got to the point of stitching, I saw that extra stitch. I'm like, oh, did I make a mistake? And I went back to my pictures of the original. No, no, Rosena stuck an extra stitch there. So I stuck an extra stitch there. This one, who knows? In the first 2 lines, you can see a lighter brown for some of the letters. O truth, whom, and M. The T at the end of slight, and my tre for sure. The high resolution pictures clearly had a difference between those letters and the others. Could it be a case that years after it was originally stitched, those pieces needed to be restitched and whoever did it had a different color? Maybe. I don't know. So, but I decided to reproduce it exactly as I saw it. And, from a distance, I don't even know if you can see it from a distance other than the fact that I've just pointed it out to you. There were a few other little things like that, some of which I wondered were on purpose. Some of them, she's 15, which is older than many of these schoolgirl samplers, students who stitch these samplers. But that doesn't mean she might not make errors here and there. But overall, it's a beautiful piece. Like I said, it is in the collection of the New York Historical Society. Now, last couple of years, COVID, things being closed, blah, blah, blah. The New York Historical Society was closed for a fair amount of time. I learned that this sampler had been on display, like not tucked away in a storage facility. Rosena had been on display for years at the New York Historical Society in their children's museum, which is to say, I think their low floor, the bottom floor is all like a children's area, as one of many, many things to help students see the history of what it was to go to school at different times and different places within New York. When I learned that, again, pre-COVID, that's where it had been, when I learned that the New York Historical Society had reopened, I'd been in contact with them to see, is it still on display? Can I come see it? And unfortunately, they had taken it off display because they're prepping it for a new exhibit that is to happen this spring. So once I have confirmation that it is available to be seen, I'm certainly planning to go to the museum. For those who don't know, I live in central New Jersey. It's a train ride away to get into New York City. It's just not crazy. It would be cool. I don't know if I'll be allowed to do this, but if I could bring this and get a picture of them side by side, that would be my hope. We'll see. So one question that I know comes up when it comes to sampler stitching, especially when the designer owns the sampler and especially when they can see the difference in colors from the front and the back. So I'm working off of a computer screen. Let's just be honest. I can get some sense. It's not going to be perfect. And then while I tried to get a fabric that was pretty close to what I could see in my pictures, I really won't know how close it is until I get to see it in person. So I had originally thought I would try to stitch this in silks because so many schoolgirl samplers are done. Rosena's, if I'm remembering correctly, is silk on wool. Oh, I should have looked that up before I started. And her sampler is about this size, a little bit smaller. I had no way to tell, even from my high resolution pictures, what size fabric it was. The only thing I could say is because it's just a little bit smaller than this, it can't be that much of a different thread count. So I was all ready to try and do this in silks. And one of the issues is I needed enough threads to play around with. I could hold up, and I'm going to use this blue as a perfect example. I can hold up various threads to my various pictures on my screen and say, yep, that's it. And then when I went to stitch with that blue, I was like, nope, not it. And then went through a number of them until I found something that seemed right. I don't have that collection of silks to be able to do something like that. And I like DMC, and so I did it this way. I think I love the way it turned out. I am so pleased. Light. If you can see, these are pink flowers. Yeah. And they are very light on Rosena's actual stitch sampler. They're very light here. Her sampler is symmetrical for the most part. The well, I'll talk about the style in a second. So back to why my pattern is 18 inches, 18 pages. So yes, part of it is because I wanted to chart it in a way that I, as a stitcher, would want to stitch it, which is to say, so I can see the 1/1 charting, but also because of how much information there is about Rosena. And I just couldn't help myself. I wanted to share. So 3 of these 18 pages is an essay, a 3-page essay about Rosena. And I want to share a little bit with you now because it is so unusual, first of all, that there is a sampler from the New York African Free School identified as being stitched by a black girl. Number 2, that there is so much information about Rosena being a black woman in the 19th century, that researchers have found her in numerous places, and that is just amazing. Obviously, not every detail is known about her, but I wanted to share everything I could, and I've included some resources and some other things in the pattern that, for those who like the story and want to hear more about the story, can follow some of the paths that I took. And I'll just be honest, this is not primary resource research that I did. I didn't have the ability to do that. I was relying on secondary research, including what is put out there by the New York Historical Society, as well as M. Finkel and Daughter, that Instagram account I referred to. Because how did this sampler come to the New York Historical Society? It came through Amy Finkel, the antique dealer. When it was presented to her by a woman who wanted to sell it, Amy, I mean, I suppose all antiques dealers sort of know if they have something special, they go to certain clients. So Amy went to see if the New York Historical Society was interested, particularly because the New York Historical Society has the papers of the New York African Free School. The school was in existence from 1790 something to 1835. And I don't know when or how, but the papers of that school are owned by the New York Historical Society. And there's a nice portion of their website devoted toward sharing what is known about this school. And so, of course, New York Historical said, yes, we want it. And they raised the money they needed to. And that was in 2010 or 11. So they've now had it for about 10 years. So where has it been since 1820? Well, glad you asked. No one's exactly sure. As what maybe, sometimes samplers are clearly handed down within a family. And, you find it in Great Aunt Tilly's trunk up in the attic, but it was great-great-great-great-grandma's or something like that. Not known here. What is known is the woman who brought it to Amy Finkel in 2010 to be consigned to be sold, inherited from her grandmother. And all that's known is that it was purchased in Texas sometime between the 1930s and the 1950s. But here's something that's amazing, fascinating. A few videos back, I was sharing that I'd gone to a used book sale, and this was one of the books I picked up. And I'd read a lot of my research I was doing during the summer, and I know when I picked this up, there was just a little something about it. It's not like I knew I owned a copy of it. There was just something a little familiar about it, and then it kind of went out of my mind. So what's in my hand is a reprint. I think this one is from this is a 1973 reprint, but the book is from 1920. So the original book was written in 1920. On page 373, it says this. They're talking about schools in New York. It's a focus on New York in this section, blah, 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 blah. Another school in New York had the interesting name of, quote, African Free School. Rosena Disery made a sampler at this school in 1820. The sampler was seen in a shop, and unfortunately nothing beyond the name of the girl and the name of the school was reported. This was written in 1920. And again, where was it between 1820 and 1920? Who knows? It is most likely that grandmother that purchased it from that store, but it's a lot of the history is missing. But the fact it's named, its actual name, there's no question about it. It was this sampler that these women, somebody saw in a store. So once I was doing my researching to write the essay, and I saw that it was, commented in the so-and-so book, I'm like, wait a second, I think I have that book, and I do. So it was, meant to be that I found this book at a used book sale just this fall. So, where am I going next? There's not much known about Rosena before 1820. They have not been able, they have her names of her parents, but that's about it. What is known is she married, I forget if we know the date, but she married a man named Peter Van Dyke, and they became a pretty wealthy family. They had 2 sons. They lived in New York. They owned a home in a street that is, now something totally different in the lower parts of Manhattan, which is all New York City was back then. New York City was not as big as it is now. There's a lot to be said about the school. If a family was able to send their daughter to a school, there was something there in terms of support and desire for education. Were any of her relatives enslaved? If so, when did they come to the U.S.? Those are questions that I'd be really curious to know, and there does not seem to be answers for that. So again, we don't know much about before she made the sampler, but afterwards. There are records of her and her husband was a caterer/cook, and in a very important kind of way. I don't know how else to say it. It's not like, he was cooking at the diner, making, quote, minimum wage. No, it seems like he was a pretty important person within the catering world in New York City. So I'm taking out my little essay here because I want to make sure I say certain things correctly. They owned a home at 133 Wooster Street. He was a prominent figure in New York, and he was written about, her husband, by name, in a 1907 book by Booker T. Washington. So he was a known person in New York City society. Other pieces that are known, husband died in 1869. In 1870, there is a bank record of Rosena depositing $500, $500 in 1870, in a bank, so they know that. But then here's the amazing thing. When she died in 1877, she left behind for her son an inheritance of $120,000. Process that, people. Okay? Her and her husband's graves, I don't know about her son's, are in Brooklyn, the Greenwood Cemetery. And if you look up pictures, they are not some small little gravestones. There's a beautiful, clearly expensive stone that was put up there. There's so many more details, and I'm just trying to give the little bits just to get you intrigued and interested. Again, it's something that makes the sampler so special, is that so much is known. And yes, I know many of the samplers out there, so much is known, but this one just feels extra special to me. So there was something, the school. So to talk about the school a little bit, again, I have lots of information, but there's a piece that I think is interesting to share. The New York African Free School was modeled off of Quaker schools, in particular the female association schools. I think I'm saying that correctly. And the teachers, particularly a female teacher of needlework, were women that likely came from female association schools. Why am I bringing this up? Well, if you take a look at this sampler here, you will see some similarities. The flower pots at the bottom and the baskets on the top, the location of borders at the top and the middle and the bottom of the words. The words are different, the name is, there's differences. This was stitched at a female association school in New York. And it's the kind of thing that, imagine if you are a girl who goes to the school, this is your sampler, you grow up, you become a teacher, you teach at the African Free School. I hope I'm saying this right. I think some of the teachers were white and some were black. I think I've got that right. But you would take your own skills to then teach your own students. And so that's how motifs in certain aspects of certain samplers were getting passed down. If you're curious what it is I'm holding up, the Betty Ring was a longtime collector, researcher, authority on schoolgirl samplers in America. She passed away a few years back. Her samplers were sold at a huge auction in Sotheby's in 2012. I didn't know much about the sampler. I don't think I knew anything about the sampler world then, but I did remember seeing posts on whatever I was reading then, blogs or whatever, about this sale, the fact that anyone could go see the samplers during the, open days. I don't know, I suppose anyone could go to the auction, but the fact that there were hours that you could go see it, that you could purchase the catalog. And that, oh my gosh, if you live anywhere in New York, you should go do this. And I'm like, you know what, I'll go. And it was very interesting. It's this tidbit of my past that as I learned more about samplers in these last few years, I'm so glad I had that piece. So in some of the research, Betty Ring's name is referenced in particular to female association schools, which are related to the Quakers, and how that is an influence to the New York African Free School. I've lost my sentence there. Anyway, there was reasons for me to look into Betty Ring. There is a sampler in the big 2-volume Betty Ring book called, I forget the name of that giant, beautiful book, that is very similar to Rosena's. Not exactly, and the words are different, but very similar. And it possibly could have been stitched by either her teacher or someone very close, someone who went to school at the same time she did or something like that. Just for interest's sake, because I always like to point this out, this sale, I don't remember what the totals were, but there was one sampler that went for over $1 million. This was in 2012. I have no idea if that record has been beat for samplers, but in case you were interested, this is the sampler that sold for over $1 million. What makes it over $1 million worthy? I don't know. But there are people out there. I mean, anything is worth as much as someone's willing to pay for it. This catalog gives you, because it's the catalog beforehand, estimated prices, whatever they refer to. And this one was definitely estimated on the high end, 80 to 120,000, which is high, very much on the top tier of the ones in here. But the fact that it sold for like 10 times that much. Okay, Betty Ring connection. The teachers. Okay, so some research has been done about trying to figure out who Rosena's teacher was, where the influence comes, and there's pieces in there. Like I said, the New York Historical Society's website has a whole section about the New York African Free School and what they've learned about that school because of what they own. I am just so excited to share this with all of you. I hope there are other people out there who are just as excited as I am and maybe are interested in stitching Rosena, especially to know more about who she is and her history. And the fact, I don't think I said this, or maybe I did. There are only 2 samplers known to have been stitched at the New York African Free School. There's only a handful of other samplers, as much as I researched, that are known to have been stitched by Black girls. These are the only 2 that are known. There could have been a whole bunch of other, and because a student didn't stitch New York African Free School, there's no way to know. The other one is in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt. It is very different. This one definitely has the Quaker influence. That one is very different, and nothing is known. I mean, they have the name. They have what's written on the stitching, but there is nothing that could have been. There was nothing that was found about that girl. I think her name was Marie. I should look that up. So that makes Rosena's all the more special to me. So I hope I've gotten you all excited about this. I've been working on this literally for a year. Like I said, the original Instagram post from a year ago, I did all the charting and everything. I was doing the stitching this fall and just loved every minute of it. In my video, not my last one, but the video before, I said that I had something exciting coming up in January and I was going to do a giveaway. And so here I am. It's been a long time since I've done a giveaway, certainly not since I moved. If you've been around for a while, I would have this bowl. Because I moved, right before hitting record, I had to go looking for the bowl, and because I knew exactly where it was in my old place, and it took a little bit, but luckily it's distinctive and I found it. So I put in here the names. I like to go old-fashioned. Sure, I could do a random number generator. I like old-fashioned. For winners, you may choose any of my patterns. You can choose Rosena. You can look on my Etsy store and find anything else you want. If you want the PDF, if you want a paper copy, I'll mail it to you, even internationally. I'm fine with that. So I'm going to choose 3 people. So I should do this so I can. There we go. The first name. Oh, wait, hold on. I got 2 in my hand. All right, I got to feel. Yes, only 1 name here. All right, so I remember seeing this. A curd. That's what's written on your comment on my video. I don't know your real name, but there you go. You have won any pattern of your choosing. Do I have a single piece? Yes, I have a single piece. Darlene LK, you have won a pattern of your choosing. And do I have a single piece? Single piece. Linda Bazarski. I definitely recognize that name. I think Linda's has come and will be coming to my New Jersey Flosstube retreat. So I will make comments on your comments on that video if you're not watching this video right now, so that you can be in touch with me and, again, offer any pattern that you want. Thank you so much for listening to my stories. I hope you're excited, because I am. I wanted to get this one out, like I said, not at market, because I think she deserves her own debut. I wanted to get out ahead of Black History Month, if that is something that is important to you. And I just wanted it to be special, and I think it is. So thank you so much for being here. I so appreciate it. Happy stitching. Till next time. Bye.